When Saudi troops rolled into Bahrain last year, was there a motive other than suppressing protests? Was it a warning to Iran? Now that Saudi Arabia is again talking up the idea of a full union of Gulf states, is it once more trying to show Iran that it won't be messed with? This is Inside Story. Good to have your company. Warm welcome to this edition of Inside Story with me, David Foster. Bahrain has summoned Iran's chargé d'affaires to protest against what it called a gross violation of its sovereignty after Tehran criticised efforts by Gulf Arab states to forge closer political and military union ties. The proposed union calls for economic, political and military integration. The latest Gulf Cooperation Council meeting ended with no decision, but this didn't stop Iran from hardening its tone, calling on its people to protest on Friday against what it described as a US plot to annex Bahrain. Some analysts say a closer union between Gulf states is part of a much broader defence strategy to counter Iran's influence. Well, the Arab Spring protests last year found their way to Bahrain in early February. The Shia majority there complaining of discrimination from the Sunni royal family and the nation's security forces. It didn't take long for Saudi Arabia to react. In March of that year, it led 1,500 Gulf troops into Bahrain to, quote, help secure government installations. It was the first time that soldiers from GCC nations had intervened in another member state. Iran then described this as an unacceptable presence of foreign troops in Bahrain, while the Bahraini royal family accused Iran of supporting the mass protests. Bahrain then recalled its ambassador to Tehran in protest at what it called blatant interference in its internal affairs. Now, fast forward just over a year and Iran is calling for demonstrations against the Saudi-Bahrain unity proposal. So what is the likely outcome of rising tensions in the Gulf between the two regional heavyweights? To answer this question, we're joined by our guest in Doha, Abdel Aziz Abu Hamad Aluwaisheg, who's the Assistant Secretary General for Negotiations and Strategic Dialogue at the GCC. In Tehran, Sadegh Zibakalam, a Professor of Political Science at the University of Tehran. In London, Saeed Al Shehabi, a Bahrain opposition activist and a member of the Bahrain Freedom Movement. And in Dubai, Mustafa Alani, Director of the National Security and Terrorism Studies Department at the Gulf Research Centre. A lot of titles, a lot of knowledge. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If I could come to you first of all, Mr. Aluwaisheg, as a member of the GCC and in charge of strategy, can I ask you in terms of strategic direction, right, is this simply a Saudi initiative?
Not really. Over the last several years, several member states of the GCC, including Qatar and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, have provided visions for the GCC. All of them, what they have in common, including Saudi Arabia has presented as early as 2001, in fact. All of these things have two things in common. One of them is an assessment of the pace of integration between the 6 member states, and second, proposals on how to move the pace of integration faster.
Let me put this to you. You mentioned Kuwait. The Speaker of Parliament says it's very difficult to consider a proposal like this, the current union proposal, to form a union with countries, i.e. Saudi Arabia, whose prisons are full of thousands who are guilty of speaking their minds, possibly Bahrain as well. So for one there, Kuwait doesn't think it would work.
No, I mean, obviously in every country there are different constituencies and different interests and different points of view. That's okay. I think what we should keep in mind, this is not a proposal for a federal state whereby internal political issues have to be settled in the same manner. This is what is proposed is a union of sovereign states, and they will remain sovereign. And by design, this proposal calls for internal matters to be left to each country on its own. It's not going to interfere with how any country, including Kuwait, on how to run its own.
We will ask some of our other speakers whether Saudi sending troops troops and other countries sending troops into Bahrain is interference in an internal matter in just a moment. I'm going to read you something that's come from Iran's parliament, a statement condemning the union plan as an unwise decision. The Iranian parliamentary speaker Ali Larijani has gone further, saying this: if Bahrain is supposed to be integrated into another country, it must be Iran and not Saudi Arabia. So let's go to Tehran. Let's talk to Sadegh Zibakalam. Iran clearly doesn't like this proposal, but what can it do about it?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I must emphasize that really the major issue and the major question is not what Islamic Republic of Iran want, not what the Saudi Arabia want, but I think the main question is what the Bahraini people want. Here we are observing decisions taken by states, by governments, by regime. None of them have been appointed, none of them have been elected by their own people. So whatever decisions are taken by United Arab Emirates, by Saudi Arabia, by the Bahrain authoritative regime, I think they don't mean anything, because observing the Arab Spring, I still can't understand that Arab Spring being in front of us, why still countries such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, etc., do not learn from what is happening in the Arab world, do not see what is happening in the Arab world, and still are trying to rule by means which belong to the past.
It is a very interesting point, and a point well made, Professor, but let me go back to the original question. This idea of a union, particularly one between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, which looks much closer than any other larger union, is something that Iran clearly doesn't like. What can it do about it?
Well, Iran, although there are many accusations levied against Iran with regard to various GCC states, with regard to Bahrain in particular, but everyone knows that what is going on in Bahrain, the protest, the uprising, has nothing to do with Iran. I mean, what has Iran done to instigate trouble against the Bahraini regime?
So effectively, Professor, effectively, Iran can do nothing about what is proposed.
Yes, Iran cannot do anything as far as that is concerned. But what I'm trying to say is that the issue is not what Iran can do and what Iran cannot do. The issue is the Bahraini people, United Arab Emirates people, Saudi people. It's the whole question of democratic movement in the region.
Well, let me talk to somebody who's part of the opposition movement in Bahrain. Mr. Al Shehabi, talking to us from London. What kind of protection do you believe the regime in Bahrain, and I know you don't speak on their behalf, far from it, from the opposition's point of view, but what kind of protection do you believe the regime in Bahrain feels it needs from Saudi Arabia?
Well, I'm not sure, actually. Thank you very much. But I think the regime is desperate. It sees that whatever has happened in the past 12 months has not safeguarded its position. The revolution is still on. The invasion by the Saudi troops has not really crushed the movement, and that the world has not really also identified with the regime's aspirations and tactics. So all in all, the regime feels is in a desperate situation, and this is something, I think, the price it is paying for allowing the Saudis to come. So it is as if it is a repayment of the goodness that the Saudis have done last year. It gave them only, in my opinion, it only gave them moral support rather than anything else, because the people of Bahrain are very, very peaceful in their protest.
So is it possible that this is not so much about what's happening in Bahrain, but what's happening in the east of Saudi Arabia, where the Saudi authorities are worried about the Shia there and other opposition movements, that actually if they integrated Bahrain effectively into Saudi Arabia, they would be sending a message to the Shia in Saudi Arabia?
Well, in reality, I will tell you this. I think I have no problem with full unity with Saudi Arabia, because then I think the whole of Saudi Arabia will be influenced by the revolutionary zeal. And I think if the union that is proposed is only between two governments and two regimes, not between two people. For me, for the whole GCC countries, if the people get together and are united with each other, this is our aspiration. If they are united and they become under one leadership, this is what everybody in that region wants. But this is not what the regimes want. They want to only to safeguard themselves, regardless of what their people want.
Mustafa Alani, we're going to bring you in here. You've been very patient in Dubai, but talking from a military analyst's point of view, do you believe what is at the moment effectively just rhetoric could escalate?
Yes, you see, first, I don't think this is the business of Iran anyway. This is two independent states, they decide their fate. There's none of business of, Iran has no business. The Iranian dimension here, because now it has been revealed, the Iranians tried to revive their claim to Bahrain, which started in 1956, as part of the state of Iran. This is the issue here. This is the major issue, the Iranian objection, coming from that dimension. The Iranians have a territorial ambition over Bahrain, and the Saudis and the Bahrainians have every right to protect their territorial integrity and the independency of the decision.
Yeah, could it escalate?
We have to remember that. Oh yes, certainly. Oh, certainly. We have to remember that well, you see, we don't know whether this union they're going ahead with it. There's a lot of other difficulties, not the Iranian objection. Nobody cares about the Iranian objection. There is other problem, which is basically some veto coming even from within the GCC. So the question here is I think it's going to escalate if it's going to be a unity between only two states. But if it's going to be an open agreement, basically it is the beginning, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, then it's open to other states to join later. I think this will reduce the chance of escalation. But the security situation in Bahrain, we're facing not only the question of a protest against the government, we're witnessing a major issue of outside intervention here. And the Saudis have to protect their interests in Bahrain, and the Bahrainians have to protect their security.
But let's go back to Tehran and Sadegh Zibakalam now. I mean, there was Mustafa Alani going back in history, the time when Iran was actually claiming Bahrain as part of it, the 14th state of Iran. That claim was almost given up, really, wasn't it? And it's not a realistic point now that Iran thinks it would ever get Bahrain back, does it?
I think Mr. Alani in Dubai, he is trying to fudge the entire issue. The issue is not whether or not some people in Iran are saying that Bahrain belongs to us or belongs to Saudi Arabia. As I said, Mustafa Alani, please listen to the voice of Bahraini people. They are not saying that we want to be part of Iran. They are not saying that we want to be part of the Saudi Arabia. They want to say that we want freedom, we want democracy, we want one man, one vote. Is that too difficult for you? They are saying it in Arabic. Is it too difficult for you to understand what Bahraini people are saying? You're saying that some people in Iran have views on Bahrain, have claims on Bahrain. It's all past history. It's gone. Iran has recognized. Before the revolution, after the Islamic Revolution, Mr. Al-Alani, Iran has recognized the integrity of the state of Bahrain. All these questions, all these issues that you're raising, Mr. Alani, that some people in Iran, some ministers in Iran, some leaders in Iran have claims over Bahrain, you're really trying to fudge the issue.
OK, well, it's a possible avenue for explanation that whether, in fact, it is for domestic consumption that some of the politicians in Iran are actually simply saying this so that they're out there in front of their people saying what they believe to be the right things. Professor Zibakalam from Mao, thank you very much indeed. Time, I think, probably to give us a little bit of perspective on the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. A loose political and economic alliance made up of 6 Gulf states formed in May of 1981 against the backdrop of the Islamic Revolution in Iran and its war with Iraq. Its members, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Qatar and Bahrain, share similar political systems and a common social and cultural outlook absolute monarchies with limited or non-existent political participation. In 1984, the GCC created an embryonic collective defence force called the Saudi-based Peninsular Shield, 10,000 soldiers there. But the GCC has failed to expand it. Oman's 1991 proposal to set up a 100,000-strong joint military body was turned down. The Peninsular Shield made no attempt to deter or counter the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait that year, but was controversially deployed, as we've said, to Bahrain in March of 2011 to bolster security during anti-government protests. Mr. Aluwaisheg, from the GCC, let me ask you to respond to a point made from our guest in Tehran, that the only reason that this proposed union is being put forward is to establish once again the undemocratic principles of the members of the GCC.
It has nothing to do with that. It is a process that has been in the works for some time. The GCC has been around for about 30 years, and it's a native-driven process. And really, the main thing, the main objective, which was stated as far back as 1981, is to consolidate, to integrate the 6 countries with the goal of unity at some point in the future.
But in 1981, there hadn't been the events, clearly, of the last 12 months. There hadn't been an Arab Spring. And collectively, those undemocratic Gulf states are going to be stronger and more able to resist popular protests than they would be on their own.
Right. But as I pointed out, it's the call for a closer unity, closer integration has been going around for some time, long before the Arab Spring. I must also clarify a few things about what you said about the Bahrain. Obviously, there are political, legitimate demands by people in Bahrain, and those are dealt with within the framework of the legal system in Bahrain. The GCC has nothing to do with those. The Peninsula Shield is not a Saudi force; it's a GCC force, as you later corrected. It's the Saudi Arabia and all the members of the GCC are treaty bound to help the Bahraini government if it feels that it is threatened by external forces. The Peninsula Shield deals only with external threats. Obviously, Bahrain feels...
But Iran denies it was involved in this, and that was the only external threat that was suggested. So what proof was there?
Of course, it would deny that, wouldn't it? Obviously. But the fingers of this current Iranian government are everywhere, are in Bahrain and elsewhere. And I think there is very convincing evidence that Iran has designs on Bahrain as well as other places. And we saw, unfortunately, the president of Iran going to Abu Musa and declaring not only that Abu Musa is Iranian territory now and forever, but also that Persian culture, as he called it, is the dominant culture now and forever. And I think these nationalistic voices that we hear from Iran are not very helpful. The issue is with this current Iranian government. It's really wrong to frame it either as an Arab-Persian or Arab-Iranian contest, or even worse, as a Sunni-Shia differences of opinion. It's really a problem with the current Iranian government.
Okay, let's go to London. Mr. Al Shehabi, talking on behalf of the Bahraini opposition. It was interesting to hear you say that you almost welcomed the idea of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia getting together, but I would imagine that would be on terms very different to the ones they would have in mind. You might want to see free and fair elections in both countries, and that doesn't seem likely. So therefore, any annexation, as Iran puts it, of Bahrain, any greater involvement of Saudi Arabia in Bahrain would be a subsuming of your country, wouldn't it?
Well, first of all, you cannot have unity when one country is occupied by the other. The Saudi forces are in Bahrain, not on the request of the people, but it is by probably the request of the Al Khalifa family, not by the people. This is number one. Number two, despite what our friends have talked about the interference of Iran in Bahrain, the Basuni report, which was sanctioned by the regime itself and financed by the king, himself had said explicitly and openly that there is no sign of Iranian involvement in the revolution in Bahrain. Thirdly, Bahrainis would like to maintain good relations with all the people in the Gulf because they are brothers and sisters. There is no difference, and I agree with my colleague who said that it is not an issue between Shia and Sunnis, between Persians and Arabs.
Okay,
I agree with that, and I hope that will be the culture.
I want to keep this along the lines of what it's going to mean if there is further integration, and go to Mustafa Alani once again. My suggestion was that after the events of the Arab Spring, Gulf countries with their undemocratic ways might be keener to stick together rather than operate on their own purely from a defensive point of view, thereby avoiding the popular uprisings that we've seen elsewhere. Is that a view you share?
You see, what happened in Bahrain is an internal issue, and there's a long history of a problem in Bahrain. This is not with the Arab Spring. You're talking about since the 50s there is a problem in Bahrain, and there's no one can deny there's a sectarian dimension and outside intervention dimension as well. So and Bahrain is a special case in the GCC, and Bahrain is the fault line. Bahrain
all right,
is
but let's broaden it
line.
out. Let's take in Saudi Arabia. Let's talk about Kuwait. Let's talk about the UAE, Qatar, and those other countries. Collectively, they're going to be stronger and more able to resist popular uprisings.
Well, I don't know what the definition of popular uprising, because we have popular uprising in 2009 in Tehran and Iran, and was crushed. So it is completely destroyed, people in the street after the election. So the question here is what the attitude to our Arab Spring. We witnessed the GCC country where the power behind which helped the Arab Spring to be successful in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and even now in Syria and in Yemen. So the principle accepted. And Bahrain is a special case. Bahrain, yes, definitely there is a problem. The political system needs to be restructured. No one can deny that. But what was worry us here in the GCC is the outside intervention. We have a power, hegemonic power, expansionist power, interventionist power, which have long history of claiming Bahrain. And even today, yesterday they repeat the claim over Bahrain. So it is wrong to summarize and the whole issue.
Okay, you keep bringing it back to Bahrain. I want to talk about broader questions at the moment. Let's go to Mr. Aluwaisheg, representing the GCC. A broad union, more than just cooperation, so that it became more than just the GCC. When is it going to happen? Is it going to happen?
Yes, definitely it's going to happen, but I think the discussions in Riyadh a few days ago showed that all member states are interested in closer integration and also in raising the integration of the 6 countries one more step. You mentioned the proposal by Oman, for example, to have a stronger army, a stronger unified force. Let me just
I'm going to have to stop you at that point and go to Tehran.
Yeah, if I could clarify just the...
I'm going to go to Tehran. Thank you very much for that. Sadegh Zibakalam, I want you to be able to wrap this up and to respond to that. If, as our guest from the GCC says, stronger union, whether it be militarily, economically, or on whatever basis, he thinks it will happen, would Iran feel incredibly threatened by that?
No, Iran would not be threatened by any union between Arab, Persian Gulf states. The question is not what Iran feels, what Iran wants to do. As I said, Mr. Al-Anani and others keep repeating that Iran is interfering, Iran is doing this, Iran is doing that, Iran does not recognize integrity of an independent of Bahrain, and I said quite categorically that the Islamic Republic of Iran does recognize the full independence of Bahrain. It's not the question whether or or not Iran does recognize the independence of Bahrain. It's not the question of whether or not Iran is interfering in Bahraini affairs or not. As our colleague in London said, the state official commission concluded quite categorically that the uprising in Bahrain had nothing to do with Iran. Has nothing
Professor,
to do with
thank
Tehran.
you very much indeed. You weren't the only one to say the question I'd asked was not the question, but all of you managed to answer your own questions very clearly. Thank you very much indeed to all of our guests. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Send us your feedback, email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. aljazeera.net. From me, David Foster, and the rest of the Inside Story team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.